Okay, welcome everybody. How is the summer going for each of you? Okay,
It's hot and rainy in the
that's what happens.
tropics.
That's what happens when you live in Florida. It's not that way in Philadelphia right now, for sure. Chicago, how's Chicago?
Hot, 85, 84.
Oh, wow, that's hot.
Nice.
Yeah.
Where else are we have represented here? It looks like we've got North Carolina, at least some other areas.
How about Tucson, Arizona?
Ah, Tucson, there we go. That's hot.
That's really hot.
But it's a dry heat, so
That's right.
that makes it better. So
Well, thank you everyone for joining us for Conversations with Kurt Hankinson, President of the ORS Board. I'm Tim Mix. I'm Marketing Communications Manager for ORS, and with us also we have Sharon Smith-Terry, who's the CEO of ORS. So we appreciate you all being here. We do this once a month, so if you'd like to join us from month to month, that would be great. We make announcements about this in email and in newsletter. Obviously, you're here, so you've seen that. We'll continue to do so. We'll continue to address various topics in this. And if at any point you have questions, please either raise your hand or put those in chat and we'll try to get to those. Otherwise, Kurt, thanks for being here.
yeah, thanks, Tim. Hi, everybody. Welcome. It's great to see so many of you. This is a nice turnout. It's small enough that we can have conversations. The worst case is when I'm just talking at you. So I prefer, you guys to ask questions and to provide feedback as well. So the first few of these we've had, haven't been necessarily so focused on any specific area, but for this one, I thought it would be nice to focus a little more specifically on the sections and what the sections are, why we're doing the sections, and maybe to get some comments and critiques from all of you about how you feel the sections are working and things that maybe could be done differently. I'll start real quick. I wanted to let everyone know that the ORS abstract submission for the annual meeting is open now. So if you go to the website, you'll be able to start working and submitting your abstract, and then those will close at the end of August. So there's about a 2-month period of time here before abstract submission closes. So something to keep in mind. Please submit your abstracts for Long Beach in February. It's going to be wonderful. We have a few pre-submitted questions that we can start with, but also, please raise your hand or put questions or comments you might have into the chat, and we can also unmute you and, have you ask questions very specifically too. Okay. So Tim, how do we want to start?
Let's start a little bit more generally about the sections because some of the questions were a bit specific. So let's start a bit general. And can you just tell us a little bit about the ORS sections, what they do and what they are?
Yeah, so the sections were started the first one started in 2015, the spine section, and the genesis of it was really several years earlier, trying to provide different topic areas, disease-focused areas with a forum for more concentrated discussions and scientific exchange. The whole idea of the sections as they started were not necessarily to just recapitulate or be sort of an add-on to the annual meeting, but rather a way to bring community of scientists together. And so the spine section was the first to be established, and that remains the largest section in terms of sort of total numbers of people. Then we started to kick it off a little bit more in 2016. Meniscus was added, and then also in 2016 the ORS adopted the International Society for Fracture Repair, so the ISFR, and then the ORS, the ISFR, the International Society for Fracture Repair, become the International Section for Fracture Repair. And then in 2017, we added 4 additional sections. So preclinical models, orthopedic implants, and the tendon section. And then officially that's when the ISFR started too, was in 2017. And then the last section to be started was in 2021, which was strategies in clinical research. And so 2 things to note, right? While these started in sort of a disease-focused area or a tissue-focused area, we now also have 2 sections that are very much more broad than that. The preclinical models, which is really touches lots of different research areas, as well as the newest one, the strategies in clinical research, which also would touch very many different clinical areas. So that's a little bit of an overview of how the sections started and where they are, but I'm also happy to go into more detail about the origin, because I know there have been origin questions in the past. Any specific comments or questions that anyone has about them? Okay. The sections, to form a section, there's a formalized process that, a submission to the board with enough supporting individuals to join. It's interesting, we have the sections, and then we also several years ago started the communities concept, and the communities concept is to represent more people with affinity in a non-research way, right? So that's our communities, as opposed to the sections where it really is supposed to be most focused on the research. And so then how do the sections operate, I guess, would be the next question. So as they're founded, the founders usually become officers in their different sections. So I actually was involved in, I led the preclinical model section when it first started. So I was responsible for kicking that one off, as well as was involved in the founding of the ISFR, but played more of a secondary role in that. From the preclinical models, right, I had a group of 3 or 4 other people who helped drive that one forward. And then we all became the initial officers. And then the goal, right, was for us to be able to step aside and let the section flourish, which is what we've done. And so the officers of the sections sort of follow models a little bit like the ORS board overall. So they have a leadership structure that's voted on by the members of that section. As well, sections will have research and education chairs as well that drive the content of the sections. The sections have all had meetings at the annual meeting. So these have moved around a little bit over time. Sometimes they, at the beginning, they were at the very beginning of the meeting and started then. And as we've continued to try to find the best location for the sections in the program to not be disruptive to other, annual meeting programming. The sections, some have also had satellite meetings. And so the satellite meetings have been often NIH R13 supported. And so Spine section has done that in conjunction with the Philadelphia Spine Research Society, the PSRS. So they've done those every other year. Meniscus has done at least 1, maybe 2 sort of outside R13 supported meetings, and similarly Tendon has done 2 different ones. The ISFR has an interesting history, because before it joined the ORS, the ISFR was actually its own body, and basically what the ISFR did was to put on meetings, and so it's continued to do that as well. So ISFR had its meeting last year in Edinburgh in association with the ICORS group. But preclinical models, as an example, though, has not had any sort of outside meeting. But what preclinical models has done that's a little bit unique is it's partnered with the other sections to have content delivered kind of across in a tissue-specific manner at the ORS. So that's kind of how some of the functions. Any questions about that at all? about how they function? Is everybody a member of a section right now? Yes. No? Are there any no's, people who are not members of sections? Okay, so a few people maybe are not members of sections. You can raise your hand in the window too, your cartoon hand if you want to too. So we have the total number of ORS members that are section members is about 45%. So a pretty high number, but interestingly, a number who choose to not join a section. And I think it's, you know, a little bit intriguing to me why people don't. There is a cost, you know, it's $50 to join a section, so there is an additional cost to it. But and I think in some cases it might be that we still don't have sections that are relevant for each individual, right? And individual's research interests. So, you know, you might note that there's not a cartilage specific section, or, you know, an osteoarthritis specific section. There, you know, there's actually not a bone section at all. And so there have been some discussions of whether there would be some advantages to adding some new sections to try to capture the research interest of more members, but well, remains to be seen. Again, those things are grassroots, and so people would have to be interested in driving those things forward, but there are definitely always openings for that. We still have new members joining sections, which is great, and you know, we have really found pretty good retention once people join, as far as their interest and willingness to stay a part of it.
Kurt, can you talk about what kind of activities sections are involved with?
Yeah, so I mean, beyond sort of the external meetings that I talked a little bit about, the, you know, kind of R13 standalone meetings that take place separately from the ORS, the sections have some scientific content at the annual meeting. I think all the sections have some scientific content. It's you know, one of the things we've talked about as a board and talked a little bit about with the program committee, and you know, we'll share a little bit more with the section leadership, is trying to make sure that the section content that's at the annual meeting is not just, you know, duplicating what the annual meeting is, right? Because, you know, the annual meeting has its programming, and you know, I think what we want to try to avoid is to have that just be an extension of the annual meeting, but really have sort of more value addedness to what takes place. And so some things that sections do that is interesting is they'll do, you know, they'll do like the ISFR right now is having this 3-minute research pitch, right, where you put a slide together, and you know, you and trainees get to pitch their idea on a 3-minute slide, right, and then they get feedback. So that's an example of something that also takes place at the meeting that the sections do. Sections could bring in experts for, you know, developing consensus on different topics. When I was, you know, running the preclinical models, for instance, we had a symposium on like non-union models, and what does non-union represent, and how do we develop an ideal non-union fracture model. So these are sorts of some of the activities that the sections can participate in. They're really, you know, we as a board and the program committee does not define what they do. So in that respect, the sections are able to sort of have it be their own community. I think the hope really is that it builds more collaboration, more interaction within that research focus of or research affinity group.
Great, thank you. And we have a question here from Gurpreet. Gurpreet, if you could go ahead and state your question.
Sure. I was just curious if you knew what the number breakdown was for sections regarding trainees versus PIs. I asked specifically because, so I'm a member of the fracture section. I didn't even realize there was a section until I became a PI. And it would have been nice as a postdoc to be able to, you know, interact with people and really find collaborators that way.
Yeah, that's a great
So-
question. Yeah, Sharon, do you have an answer to that?
Yeah, we have not broken down the sections by individual member type yet, but by request of each section, we can do that. What Kurt reported to you is what we are including in our new dashboard that the section chairs will get. It's by section. So then we can drill down into more detail based upon what the section requires. So we can get that number for you.
Okay. I was just curious because I found like for the fracture section specifically, I felt like it does a lot for trainees. And as if I was a trainee that was a part of that section way back then, it probably would have really helped a lot for me in my development. Because rather than going out and seeking mentors and figuring out how to apply for a grant or whatnot, you know, the resources available right there at your fingertips, which is great as a trainee.
Yeah, I agree with you, Gurpreet. I mean, I think it is and I don't know how much individual sections have focused on trainee development. They do have, you know, trainee awards and, you know, that sort of thing for trainee presentations, right? So there is some of that focus, but how well they try to build a trainee community, you know, is another question. And I agree with you. I think it is a great opportunity for trainees to have a smaller, more focused community than, you know, the ORS as a whole, which, you know, I mean, as we all know, with 3,000 members and you know, a large meeting can be difficult for trainees to meet people, particularly people maybe within their field. So the sections could be a great venue for doing that better. And so I think that'll be good feedback to give to the section leadership about that. And I like that idea for sure. And at least thinking about like, how do we do it? So the trainee awards are great, having trainee presentations, but maybe building sort of more, you know, more active, some, you know, I was going to say career development, right? But I want to be careful about that because with across ORS, there's activities for sort of more career development things. So this would be very much more focused on, you know, meeting new PIs. So maybe something sections could do is mentor-mentee matching within the section, you know, to you know, something like that, or, you know, some speed dating type of events within the section. So those would be things sections could consider, I think, to give trainees a better experience. So thanks for bringing that up.
Great, you've mentioned a lot of benefits for members in joining a section. Anything else? Any other benefits we haven't addressed?
Well, I think that those probably, Tim, I appreciate that. I mean, those are I think big ones. I mean, there are, I guess, other things that are, you know, there's news, you know, monthly newsletters. I'm fairly certain every section has a newsletter that occurs at least, you know, with some frequency. So being able to participate in that, I mean, I think a real advantage of the sections that is, you know, not what we talked about from the perspective of community and science is giving people an opportunity for leadership at a different, you know, sort of a beginning, you know, at an early level, right? So, you know, I've thought a lot over the years about like, how do you gain a leadership portfolio in the ORS, right? It can be a challenge to do that in a large organization. And I think the sections, because they're smaller, kind of offer an opportunity for that. You know, they offer people, particularly maybe at the beginning of their career, opportunities to have leadership roles within the organization that maybe they wouldn't have had as an easy a time enough with prior to the sections being formed, right? So, you know, we essentially, by creating the sections, you know, sort of increased our leadership opportunities, we increased that by, I don't know, 50 positions or something, right? Because of section leadership positions.
And how do people know which section is right for them?
That's a good question. I think there's sometimes it's pretty easy, right, to know, where you fit. Other times I've always been interested in people who join sections and on the surface maybe wouldn't seem like they have a lot of affinity for it, right? But maybe they've joined because they have a colleague that's a part of it, or maybe they want to get into that field. So I guess I think deciding what section to be a part, so there's no limit to the number that you can be a part of. For one, you can join as many sections as you want. I think it's finding what best aligns with your research interests. And then the other side of it, right, is we talked about, half the ORS isn't a member of a section, right? And so is that because they don't feel affinity for any particular research group, or maybe they just don't feel it's necessary to join it, which I think is okay too. But the barriers to joining are fairly low, and I think it's easy to sort of look at what each group does and make those decisions.
And how you talked about the annual meeting a little bit already, but how will the sections be represented there in the annual meeting in February?
Yeah. So, every section will have some meeting at the annual meeting. And I think right now the program committee, the annual meeting committee, is working on, deciding when those will be. And then the sections are all working on what their programs will be for the annual meeting. So, those, again, that's not so top down. The sections are given a lot of latitude in making those decisions, and they're given time slots. They ask for time slots depending upon what they want to present, and then we try to fit that in. Sharon, do you have anything more to add about that, about how it's fit into the program from a timing perspective?
Yeah, I know that most of the sections have asked for weekend, either Saturday or Sunday sessions, and we're still working that out. So, as well as I know that there's a section on Friday as a workshop, but I know Matt is making all those final decisions probably over the next 2 weeks with the program committee to determine that. Part of that is sort of like getting into a rotation of, if a section presented on a favorable day this year, then next year it'll be a different day. So we want to be able to establish parity across all the sections on giving them their ideal day to have their meeting between Saturday and Monday. So this year that we haven't really finalized that plan yet, but I expect that to be coming within the next couple of weeks. So that'll be happening. The only thing that's different from last year that's clearly been decided is that the section meeting time has been reduced from the 3 hours to 2 hours. And so I know the sections are planning for a program in that time frame.
Yeah, and one of the rationales for that was we had a lot of feedback from the sections about, so often the meetings were going for 3 hours and maybe would have a lunch, but we were finding that was there was sort of a lot of ordered meals that weren't being eaten, and then there was sort of a lot of waste going on during that lunch period. And we thought that it would be, rather than a long meeting with some meal or break needed, sort of contracting it would be, a more advantageous thing to do. The annual meeting committee and the scientific program committee are just sort of constantly faced with, trying to fit everything into, what I know the meeting seems long when you're there, right? It seems like it's 3 weeks long when you're there, but the reality is it's a pretty short period of time. And how do you fit everything into sort of, 3 days? And, Sharon mentioned this sort of the preferential time, right? Because everybody would like to do their things on Saturday and Sunday, right? So everybody has a preference for, things happening on, the first 2 days, or or maybe on the Monday, because, we start to, people will start to leave, people start to trail off. We've all seen that at the meeting. And, what we want to try to do is have things spread across the meeting and get people to come and stay for the entire event as possible. Karen, you have a question?
Yes, going back to the question about how does one determine which section they should join or they would like to join. There are portions of presentations that are not closed to non-section members. And that would be a good time to learn what's going on in the section, to see who the leadership are, and perhaps talk to them, approach them about joining as a section member.
Yeah, thanks, Karen. I think that that's right. I'm not sure that every section has open sessions. Sharon, maybe you can comment on that, but I would totally would agree that, you know, going and checking out and when they're holding something that's open to everybody is a great approach.
Yeah, not all sections have decided whether they're going to be open or closed. I think more to come on that from all the sections to decide whether or not they're open or closed
Yeah.
sessions.
May I ask a question? This is Gary Ballion.
Hey, Gary.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, of course.
I have a much broader perspective of these sections because some of you may not know, but I'm editor of a journal, and that journal has started with the participation of Dr. Hankinson. Special issues. About 10 years ago, we began those, and in looking back, many of the sections in the society, such as tendon, stem cells, there isn't a section for that at the moment, meniscus, and another which I've forgotten, have been basically the foundations of this special issues, and the editors were participating as basically the source of those who contributed to those special issues. So the papers came because of the insight of the editors by way of the special sessions that were held through the ORS. Now, I believe that the JOR is doing something similar, has been for a number of years now, with their editorial board involved. So I can see that the way in which these special meetings are held are influencing the field through these publications. That's my perspective.
Yeah, Gary, I think you're right. I think that they become sort of nucleation points for key topics, right? I mentioned the non-union one that the ISFR had, and we didn't end up turning that into a article. There was some efforts to do that, and then some of us, perhaps me, dropped the ball on it, and it didn't happen. But I think you're right. I think there's great opportunities for the sections to serve as being the nucleation of leadership in the entire field. Yeah, I agree completely.
We've had a couple questions that were addressed during registration. So Julia Harrier would like to know, how do you get involved in ORS sections?
Yeah, Julia, thanks for the question. I mean, hopefully we sort of hit upon that a little bit. Again, some of the section meetings at the annual meeting will be open, but that's obviously not the only way to get involved or to see what's going on. I mean, I think that you can join a section at any point and participate in their activities. Some of this I probably failed to mention. So I mentioned that the sections have newsletters, but some of the sections do some programming in the virtual world outside of the annual meeting, and so there would be ways to get involved in the sections irrespective of the annual meeting. And then again, these satellite meetings that take place would be another place to get involved. And I think it's really a little bit dependent upon does it fit a research does it fit a research interest. If it doesn't fit a research interest, then I think perhaps, maybe thinking about could the preclinical models work as a potential fit? If you're not into tendon or meniscus, or could the clinical studies section be a good fit potentially, right? So, I mean, I think that's maybe one good thing about having both the clinical studies section and the clinical research strategies and clinical research and the preclinical model section is that those are across tissues, across disease entity, and are opportunities to get involved depending on whether you're sort of preclinical or clinical. And my guess is most research at ORS touches one of those two areas, although obviously not everybody. So, Julia, did that help, or anything more that I could answer about that?
No, that was great.
Oh, sorry.
I submitted that question at the like when I registered. So
Yeah, thanks.
thanks.
What's your area, Julia?
I'm working on bone research. I'm actually new to ORS and joined one of the sections last minute because I didn't even know that sections existed before the last meeting. Yeah, so I just was
That's
interested
great.
in
What'd you join?
ISFR. One of my
Yeah.
committee members was giving a talk. So
Okay. Well, yeah, it's probably good choice as a bone person.
Mhm.
Although, obviously there's a lot of bone biology at ORS that's not covered by ISFR. And I see Jay asked, are there new sections in the works? And, I don't know. I mean, no one has asked me about it or brought it up to me, but they don't have to bring it up to me either. We've not had, Sharon, to my knowledge, right, at least in the last year or two, any new groups expressing interest.
No. Yeah.
I've always thought there would be space for having a bone, sort of a bone section. A lot of the people who work on bone that aren't doing bone healing at the ORS are focused on mechanical loading, mechanical adaptation, right? And it would seem like there could be potentially a good fit for people in sort of the bone imaging, bone mechanics, right, area. And, similarly, I think it's a bit surprising that, there's not a cartilage one. And for those of you who are long in the tooth like me, and I know that there's a few of us on here, there was a time at the ORS when probably 75% of the content was cartilage. And, I think as, some of you who maybe are in the cartilage field or at least adjacent, ORSI is an organization that sort of has grown a lot in this period of time. And I think we've lost some of our cartilage biologists to ORSI. And, I think if we had a cartilage section, maybe we'd be able to, be doing more to retain those. But, again, it's grassroots. And so people have to be interested in making it happen.
Yeah, my impression was that the sections, at least when I joined ORS, which was about 10 years ago, when the sections came about, I was a meniscus researcher, and it was to highlight the topic areas that maybe only got 1 or 2 sessions a meeting, right? So that they could have more content. Whereas cartilage and bone have a ton of sessions, right? So that's what my theory was. I didn't know that a cartilage section could happen. I thought it was always meant to highlight those underrepresented tissues or areas.
Yeah, I think that's a good argument, perhaps, Jay, of why it might not be necessary, right? As they are, well represented from, on sort of the typical ORS platform in the poster sessions and in other sessions. But I think, if you think about sections as being more than just delivering content, right, and being groups of investigators building a community, I think there is that possibility. A number of years ago was an example. I'll just share this. There was a small side working group formed to address the feeling that bone folks, like the mechanobiology, bone imaging folks, felt like there wasn't enough for them there at ORS, right? And, at that time, I remember, I was involved with that and thinking, well, form a section, if this is something that you want to do. But again, people just have to be interested and willing to do that. I don't think just because there's more content, right, or more sessions on cartilage or on bone, that should obviate their forming a section. I still think there could be utility in it. I do think you are right, Jay, that in part, these groups form sections because of that, right? And maybe particularly starting with spine, spine felt like there wasn't enough spine being presented, and it's I mean, it's spine people in the spine section represent, close to 10% of the ORS. So it is a pretty big area. And so, the program should reflect that, obviously. When we started preclinical models, definitely it wasn't about, having more presentations, right? It was more about, for us, it was more about how can we build a more robust guidance and structure on models? Can we build consensus? And these kinds of things were sort of the driver for the preclinical models.
Yeah, and that's, I guess, my next question, if it's okay to ask one more, is, does a section need to be a tissue, right? And I think we're showing with the preclinical model section, with the clinical study section, right, that it doesn't have to be. So if like 3D printing, or if, in vitro models becomes a section, right, or organ on a chip, I mean, we'll see how the next 5 years plays out, but could that be the next section, that it's not tissue driven, it's kind of technology driven or research driven?
Yeah, that's really interesting. I mean, I feel like I'm, I think I'd be open for that. It'd be interesting to see, what others thought about that. Would those sort of would something technology driven be better in a community, right? The communities, but I don't know. I'm sort of inclined to think probably a section, it could work, right, as a section, in vitro models, or, something that would incorporate. So we have clinical strategies, we have preclinical, but some people are, sort of not in either of those, and might want to have some groups. So I think we're open to considering alternative.
May I add to that?
Yeah, Gary.
This is Gary Ballion again. The sections appear to be an evolving system. You mentioned the fracture section. You could add mesenchymal cells to that. You can add bone. You were thinking of a bone section and being a needed one. But if you inject into those sections these existing investigators who might be invited, that could help those evolve, because at some point the sections that the points that the sections are studying could become stale naturally, and then would have to be rejuvenated with new information. I think this is something that I actually raised when I registered, was what you were thinking about the clinical aspects. And from my background, I've been retired for 10 years, but I worked in orthopedics for 35. So now I realize that many of the ideas that I had on the tissues that we worked on emanated from the information that I received from clinicians and from their experience. And I had raised the question as to whether bringing in a clinician per section as a stimulator of existing work might be worthwhile as far as the membership is concerned.
Yeah, and you're thinking, Gary, like to just be there, presenting about clinical problems and relevant clinical problems.
Yes, the relevance of our work. How do we make our work more relevant, therefore more competitive, since the funding is so based on clinical problems? They're not as interested in primarily in basic research as they are in clinical implications. All of that would add to the competitiveness of the membership's applications for funding and publications.
Yeah, I agree. I think that would be another sort of like training experience. That would be another good thing to take back to the sections as a whole. My guess is every section has some surgeon scientist member, but how much they're sort of engaged in like really discussing the clinical problems, isn't it, I think you're right on. I mean, you know, I think, Gary, those conversations are the things I think the section should be having, not just being a forum for presenting more data, right? I mean, I think the sections are most valuable, you know, in cultivating careers, bringing people together, building teams, you know, building consensus, and you know, less so, I mean, presenting, you know, science in a traditional format. So I think the section's thinking about like really how they're going to address, you know, real world clinical problems is important.
Well,
So
you're the, you're
yeah,
the
so-
president, you're the president, Dr. Hankinson.
Right, I am the president. Not sure what authority that gives me to change their direction, but I can at least, you know, I can at least suggest those, because I think it's a great, I actually think it's a great idea. And something for people to think about. I mean, you know, some are obviously more clinical than others, right? I mean, you know, I think implants is probably inherently quite clinical, right? You know, but are they always being guided by the needs of you know, implant surgeons is another question. So, you know, Gary, I'll just say really quick, bringing up that comment about the clinicians and you know, you know, our organization is quite unique, right? And having this mix of people from different disciplines, and we understand that many people are in and of themselves can become more cross-disciplinary. So engineers are doing biology, biologists doing computational work, you know, so we do understand there's that, but you know, we still do think that a strength of the ORS is our clinician scientist members, our surgeon scientist members. And so we're kicking off a task force that's going to kind of look at how do we keep surgeons more involved in the organization. How do we bring in more clinicians, perhaps even from outside of orthopedics, that might be interested in what we're doing, you know, physical medicine and rehabilitation, you know, that kind of thing. You know, so we're thinking a lot about how do we stay as this clinically oriented organization, right? I mean, strong basic science, but you know, being, you know, focused on you know, but being focused on clinical problems. Yeah, Peter. Peter, you need to unmute. Sorry. Or Tim can unmute you.
Okay, you here now?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I would like to enlarge about what Gary just said about looking into problems and so on, and the role of the potential role of the sections. For example, I recently visited a friend in who runs a gait laboratory, and just a rambling discussion, and we got involved with, well, how can we alleviate osteoarthritis of the knee? And we got into discussions about the role of gait analysis, you know, ground to force, foot force measurements, all different kinds of footwear that you can use to change the loading patterns at the knee, and even internal surgical procedures or braces and so on and so on. And then just yesterday, I met with a very distinguished biologist, a cartilage, primarily focused on cartilage cells. And I asked him, I said, do you think we can cure, treat, slow down osteoarthritis in a biological way? And he was very intrigued with the question. And of course, it's an age-old question, but he said, you know, early on, yeah, perhaps we could. There are signs that we could reactivate cells, but he said, once you get to a moderately advanced stage, there's not enough cells around, and I don't know how we put new cells there. And I think it's a losing battle at some point. But, you know, there we have the problem is osteoarthritis of the knee, many different causes. The way we can approach it, there's many different ways to approach it. Biomechanically, you know, rehabilitation, or biological. So I just wonder, let's say that's an interesting question, because look, we've had artificial joints now since I joined the society, which is so long ago, I can hardly remember. But, in the early 70s, we had artificial knees and hips. We still do. And they work very well. They really are a good solution to the problem once you've got advanced arthritis. But do you see what role is that the sort of thing you would have in mind for the sort of problem that the sections could look into, rather than, as you point out, Kurt, just presenting data, research studies, individual studies, looking at fundamental questions, important questions like that, which are of great interest to clinicians and researchers, both. You're going to invite, let's say your conference is in a certain location, you're going to invite surgeons in that area to come and present stuff. I mean, surgeon involvement is very important, I think, for the ORS. I know we've lost surgeons, but I think locally you could bring in surgeons into these groups, and talk about real clinical problems.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, I think that as far as like bringing in local surgeons locally, it is definitely one of the things we've kind of thought about, like with being in Long Beach, essentially in LA, a large, population area. It would seem like we could be able to draw right from that orthopedic community. And so, again, I think it's a great thing to take back to the sections, right? To really be thinking in a more clinical, future thinking terms, right? I mean, your question you raised specifically about OA and where is the field going as far as treatment? What are possibilities long term? I think it's a really good question, and my guess is that every field, right, of every sort of tissue topic area has those, but also I'm thinking a little bit about, right, like, so to go to meniscus, right? Meniscus, you're sort of separating the joint into one little piece and you're not considering it in a holistic way, right? So there you wonder whether, the section functioning in isolation could be a negative. And so maybe also promoting more interactions with the sections, maybe asking the sections to think a little bit more broadly about what they do and what their mission is, right? So I think that's a great conversation, and for sure we'll take that back to the sections as something to think about. And right, I mean, again, going back to OA, obviously we know sort of what the morphological consequences of it are, right? But we don't spend a lot of time thinking about the psychosocial aspects of it, how gait, could influence it, or, other sort of, other parameters, outside of the biological. So maybe we have a question from Marguerite and Andrew. And so maybe we'll go to Andrew and with his question.
Thank you. Hey, Gert, I really do appreciate you holding the session and talking about the sections, because I didn't even know they existed either until just now and seeing the email. But I was really interested, and I was going to ask kind of to Peter's point, do the sections ever promote any like joint conversations between themselves, or is that just kind of up to them? And I mean, I can see those sections easily meeting like over Zoom throughout the year and not just restricted to in person at the meeting.
Yeah, so, the sections, I mean, to my knowledge, I don't know if they do like sort of whole section meetings virtually. I mean, Sharon might have a better idea about that. I mean, obviously the leadership does, but I do think, right, like having them do more that takes place throughout the year is a good idea for sure. And then the working across the sections, I think is really important. Jay just put in the chat, meniscus and preclinical models did something together. Preclinical models did it with the ISFR, but how about meniscus and implant, right? Or, implant and spine. And I don't know how much those interactions have taken place, right? And, I think that challenging the sections I think what maybe this conversation has been really good because it's made me think that we maybe need to be challenging the sections to do more and maybe think a little bit bigger about what their impact can be. And these are good ideas, right? What more can you do outside of the ORS meeting? How can you interact more with other sections? How can you engage more clinically? I think these are all really good thoughts.
Yeah, I kind of brought up because of Jay's point and like FE modeling or computational analysis. Maybe I think it might have been machine learning as its own section, but it always brings up the point is like how many sections is too many sections, right? When can we just limit the focus? So it's almost like we can have these sections to group everyone together, but they might be tools and methods that each of them need. So a machine learning group can meet with, say, the tendon group to do specific to reach specific goals. But my other question was a little bit more towards Peter's point again about the surgeons and clinicians that actually are involved in these sections. I was wondering if, like, I think these Zoom meetings or virtual meetings would be the gate to that because the clinicians and surgeons are notoriously busy and not all of them are in Long Beach, California, or in whatever city you want to be in. So it's almost like if we can just like send out emails or just feelers to the top surgeons that may not be ORS members but could provide input to the sections and like at least point us in the right direction kind of thing.
Yeah. I think you're right. There's ways to get surgeons involved and without having them necessarily be part of ORS, right? I mean, we think about wanting them to be part of the ORS, but we can still have them provide important input and impact without that. So I think it's a great
Even a
point.
call for letters, I'm thinking.
Yeah.
Like as long as they can provide input, the section can do their job and actually like sifting through that input and figuring out what's important.
Yeah. That's great. It's a great idea. Thank you so much.
I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah, no, I appreciate the comments. Thank you so much. Marguerite?
Hi, thank you so much. Yeah, so I'm a trainee right now. I'm still a PhD student. I am part of Tendon Section, and Tendon Section I think has been doing, it's been a great home for me. We do a semi-annual meeting, which was really helpful for me. We had surgeons come in and show us plenty of really interesting techniques that I was unaware of, which guides some of our research now. So I think we have a lot of clinical input. I got to network there in a way that I really hadn't gotten to because of the pandemic, because everything was shut down and you couldn't really talk to people. So I agree that I think that these section meetings are super important. And in that, like how accessible they are, I think is also really important. We talked about that in terms of like, how do we make them more inviting, let people know about them? But something else that comes up is the fact that frequently these meetings are held outside of regular ORS annual meeting. And something that's come up for me and a lot of people like me is that where meetings are held can absolutely determine whether or not people are comfortable in participating in them. Like Zoom is really helpful. That said, I know that we hold meetings in Texas, and Florida in particular has been a bit of an issue for myself and people I care about, to the point where statements have had to be made by the ORS when we have meetings in these areas. And there's a lot of sections, people are interested, they're really helpful. And I have concerns that these meetings need to be in places where people can go without being nervous about going to the bathroom or having, I don't know, any sort of health issue. So that's just my 2 cents, that these are really helpful meetings to have. These are really helpful societies to have. And if we want for them to be taken advantage of by our members and be able to grow, members need to be able to access them. That's my 2 cents on it.
Yeah, thanks, Marguerite. I really appreciate that. I want you to know I personally very much share your sentiments about what's been going on in our world over the last number of years. That was always there in the background, but now has emerged. more clearly. So right, we started sort of having discussions about this with respect to going to Tampa, right? So I'll tell you maybe a few things, right? Meeting locations are set many years in advance, for one thing, right? And so when Tampa was rolling around and then when Dallas was coming up and thinking about these issues about inclusivity and how these states have legislated to create hostile environments. We spent a lot of time talking about this. I mean, the board, particularly the presidential line, cares very much about these things. And so, like with Dallas, we had some conversations about, well, could we move the meeting, right? And there are people who have moved meetings, right? But we were locked in financially, and it would have been sort of catastrophic for the organization to do that. And so here's the challenge, right? It's like, and it leaves me in a very quite frankly uncomfortable space personally, right? It's like, on the one hand, I have this strong fiscal responsibility to have a functioning, research organization where people want to get together, and and similarly the staff, Sharon as the leader, Tim, have that same, fiduciary responsibility. So how do you balance sort of these cost things with these very important equity and inclusion things, right? How do we balance those two things together? So I'll tell you that we did not, prior to last year, when Sharon sort of joining in as our executive director, we didn't have any set criteria for how we would consider the inclusive nature of the environment we might be going into. But now it is very much one of the criteria that we're considering when we consider where to locate. So it is something that we are very much thinking about as we move forward and we pick new sites. So first, please know that is something we're not blind to, and it's important to us, and we're very committed to it. So there's that side of it. The other side of it is so there was an annual meeting survey recently, right? And one of the questions we wanted to ask people about was where and when they wanted to have the meeting. And, one of the things that I think was elucidating was that, the people want to have the annual meeting in the first quarter of the year, right? So they want to have it from January to March, which is when they've typically taken place. And yet, so they're, they don't think, there's people who are not so enthusiastic about holding a meeting in Minneapolis in January, February, or March. So thinking about sort of the physical location and whether it's conducive to a meeting becomes important too. So unfortunately, some of our warmer parts of the country are some of those places that have passed non-inclusive discriminatory policies, right? The other thing about sort of the annual meeting is one of the things we've talked about a little bit is like, so we've always wanted to try to do East-West co-localization, right? So 1 year in the East Coast, 1 year on the West Coast. And I think we do feel very committed to that. And we asked people whether they would be interested in having just a single set site in each place. Then we know where we are and we know what we're getting all the time, right? People were not interested in that. They want to move around to different cities. So that also adds another layer of complication onto this. But so I want you to know, we're really thinking about it. We're quite serious about it. And it is balancing all of these things together. And then maybe the one final comment I would say is, I think it's, if we're going to be in these places that where people might not feel safe or comfortable in their identities. I think it's going to be very incumbent upon us to make sure that we set some parameters in place and help people to feel more safe. So in Dallas, one of the things that we did as an example was they did not have ungendered restrooms, right? But we asked them to do that. We asked them to provide that, right? And to have gender neutral restrooms. We provided other safe spaces for people in Dallas that we sort of forced the hotel to do. And then other things I think we can do when we go to places is think about how we interact and reach out to the community and how we best reflect our values as an organization when we're there as well. So, we before Dallas had like a list of, sort of inclusive restaurants and stores and things for people to go to. And so these are things that we can try to do. The issue of sort of safe healthcare is one that might not be able to, we might not be able to overcome very easily, but one that I think is an important thing for us to continue to try to deal with and address, because it is real. And I want you to know that I know that it is a real problem, and that we'll try to do everything we can to make it a safe space for our members.
Thank you. I also know we're over time, so this.
Yeah, I know
I'm sure this
we're
can
over time,
continue.
but I also wanted to address that and address it seriously, just so you know that we care. I care very much about this. So,
If I can just add on to that question quickly, I really appreciate like what you guys are trying to do, and I think Sharon wrote some things in the chat that also are really encouraging. I guess also in terms of thinking of these meetings, I think it's important, like the ORS can be as accommodating as possible in certain locations, but it is still a factor that will impact people, even if they're able to travel, in terms of how they're able, excuse me, to feel like comfortable and engage in the meeting versus just feeling stressed. So I think what you're doing is great, and certainly a great starting point in this. Like somewhere like Florida, me as a trans person, I wouldn't travel to a meeting there, even if the ORS was super accommodating at this present time. Like the Human Rights Campaign has issued a travel warning for that state. So like, I think these are kind of things that are worth considering as we're planning meetings years from now, even if that's like a lovely warm state that people want to go to. I know this may only affect a very small proportion of the society, but I really appreciate that you guys are taking this seriously and considering it deeply. And like the ORS has been a huge career development thing for me over many years. So it's good to hear. And I also think it's important to like emphasize that it's kind of probably going to be more important in years to come as well.
I think so too, and I share the seriousness of it, right? I don't want to travel to Florida. I don't want to travel to Texas. I didn't, I'm talking Kurt Hankinson, not maybe president of the ORS. I wasn't real excited about traveling to Dallas, right? I mean, I understand, I'm an old white guy. I'm probably safe in those spaces, but if my whole community is not safe there, then that's a real problem for me. And so it has to be an important criteria, and it is going to be one of our criteria. And and maybe we need to adopt some language from the Human Rights Campaign about how we make these decisions, and maybe we need to be messaging better that, so what do you value more, warm weather or human rights? I mean, I think it is a serious question, right? I would rather be in Minneapolis in February, truly, than Florida in February, right? That's my personal feeling. And, as an organization, though, we'll have to weigh those things, right? Because my fear is, is now putting the organizational leadership hat back on, if we had, appreciate that, Marguerite. If we held it in Florida, in Minneapolis in February, my fear is we would lose a lot of people, and then then there's a real problem with the money, right? And so how do we balance the sort of money side, with what we're doing relative to being true to our values? Yeah. So thank you. I appreciate it, and keep pushing I please don't let, I'm in this role for only a year, right? So keep pushing and keep making sure. I think Sharon, in her leadership role, she'll be there, hopefully forever. Takes this seriously too. And so I think she will be promoting these issues. And, maybe we need to get more feedback from members about, truly asking either or, right? Here's your choices, little cold weather for the meeting versus, potential for, people not feeling safe. I'll make one other comment, and this is relevant because we do have at least one Floridian on the call, right? I mean, these states, unfortunately, are not monolithic, right? And you have, definitely lots of people in these states that share these values. And, I mean, there are some people who have suggested, and I'm not sure where I come in on this, but there are some people who have suggested that, our being there, present, sticking up for our values is a positive thing, right? But that doesn't help the safety of people, right? So yes, maybe we have some, there's some positiveness of us being there, but it doesn't help, whether our members feel safe. So, everyone, this has been, yeah. Karen.
Yeah, sorry, if I could add, I really expected RS to depend more on me for truth about Tampa versus Tallahassee and so on. And I didn't quite get that, but I was very pleased with what you did to the hotel in Dallas, even though that was, again, a difficult place to be.
Yeah.
I would stand up. I did stand up and say, I won't go to ORS if it's in Las Vegas again, because it just makes me sad. But I know that that's one of a favorite place for other people. So
it is not on
anyway.
our list. It is not on our list in looking
Right.
at the data.
Yeah.
That people didn't enjoy it and people sort of, it's so we're not, it's been one of these kind of things for ORS, even though it's on the list at this conference as the #1 place, most favorite places for associations to visit.
Mhm.
Vegas is one, but it's not ours, so it's not going on our list.
Yeah.
Kurt, check.
And if
check
anyone
me on
wants
that. Yeah.
wants to contact me to learn about my experience in Tampa, at least, or other parts of Florida as well, I'm welcome.
Thanks, Karen. And I think you raise a good point. And maybe we need to do a little bit more at all meetings, right? Not just, Tampa or Dallas, but like when we're going places to reach out to local members and try to find out more, right? Where really get a more on the ground understanding of the cities. I don't think we've done probably a good job of that. So everybody, I'm really sorry to have to go. We did go 10 minutes over. I'm late for another Zoom meeting after being on all day, but this was a very important conversation to have. Marguerite and Sophie, you guys brought it up, and if you want to talk more with me about it, I'm happy to. Send me an email. If you think that there's other people who would want to engage in a conversation about it, I'm happy to have that conversation too. You see how candid I am and how much I'm willing to be open about the different hats I wear in life, right? My personal and my sort of ORS leadership. But I'm happy to talk more with both of you or anybody who wants. Anytime you can email me. So, all right.
Thanks a lot, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Tim and Sharon, for setting this up. I appreciate it.
See you next month.